What's up, guys? I'm not in frame yet. I got new glasses literally today. Let me know how you feel about them. I'm kind of riding high off of it. I think these look really nice. My other glasses were so messed up. They were just cracking at the arms on the sides of the frames for like the past like 5 months. So it was long overdue. I'm glad to have them. I got 5 books, I think, that I've read since the last time we did a video. Took me a while. And unfortunately, I only have one of those books physically. Um, for each one I don't have is for a funny reason. But we're just gonna get right into it. Yeah, it's been a while, mostly because the last book I read, the one I just finished for this video, I was like, I'm not gonna make one until I finish it. I've been reading it since like January, just slowly working through it. So that held me back for quite a while. But now we're ready. First, I'll start since it's kind of I have one that's fresh on the mind since I am reading the sequel right now. It's called, you might have heard of it maybe, On the Calculation of Volume by I looked up the pronunciation. So Solveig Balla, I think Balla. No, she's a Danish author, I want to say. I'm probably already disrespecting her. But I have the sequel. The first one I already gave to a friend of mine. So that's a vote of confidence for it, right? Gorgeous cover. The first one looks very similar. Um, and it's written in translation. Is she Danish? Oh God. She's from a Nordic country. Yeah, Danish. Thank God. Anyway, this book is really pretty fantastic. It's about like a Groundhog Day scenario. Um, this woman, she's an antiquarian book dealer. She gets stuck in a time loop. And the rules of the time loop aren't totally cut and dry, but um the real crux of the first book is about her relationship with her husband kind of deteriorating because her husband's stuck in the time loop. Or yeah, she's unstuck. The rest of the world's completely just repeating over and over. So basically, it's like 51st dates, almost like she has to explain to him every single day that, the situation she's in over this loop, they just grow further and further apart. And she really starts losing her mind. I, have thought about being in a Groundhog Day scenario myself, and I had like kind of an unearned confidence about it, cockiness. I really thought that if I ended up in a Groundhog Day scenario, I'd be able to do well. Um, I have a secret passcode for anybody else. If they're in a Groundhog Day scenario, there's a word that they can tell me on like that second loop where I just trust them completely and we can do whatever we want. Right. So you can tell I've literally thought about this, but I've imagined like in that kind of world, I would find a way to be happy. And reading this book, I realized that that kind of happiness is short earned. If the day just keeps repeating over and over, you just grow more and more apart from everyone in your life. Like nobody can imagine what the protagonist is going through, and she really starts falling apart by the end. Um, Part of that is just the inherent absurdity of her situation. The rules aren't easy to pin down. Like it doesn't reset exactly at midnight. And she also like carries over items every day. And it's not really consistent how that carrying over process works. Sometimes she has a coin in her pocket, the coin comes the next day. Sometimes it disappears and returns back to wherever it was at the beginning of that, calendar day. And by the end of the book, she's been through basically a whole year of the same day. She's familiar with the rhythm. She's familiar with that cycle. And I think the best she's really a master, the author of like speculative fiction, in that like Margaret Atwood sense. She just has completely projected her imagination into this impossible, unjust, absurd situation and really portrayed it in a very realistic way. It's honestly very similar to Wittgenstein's Mistress, which I talked about in my last review, maybe my favorite book of the year. And in that, like, you have this one person in a state of total solitude, like existential solitude, and just slowly becoming more and more divorced from reality. It's portrayed so realistically that like maybe my only negative note would be that the language is very like mundane and repetitive as a deliberate stylistic choice, but I think ultimately that kind of hurts the pathos of the book because things are so realistic that the language becomes almost numbing. Uh, when if you employed a more expressive voice, maybe you lose a bit of the realism, but I think it'd be a lot more emotionally powerful. But it's your mileage may vary. That's just me. Um, but yeah, fantastic book. And there's I think 7 books in the series. They're slowly serialized, publishing them into English. I think there's 4 now. So you can get on while they're still being released into English. And I have no clue where it's gonna go because at the end of the first one, she's pretty much fully crazy to me. Well, I don't know. That's not really fair, but like she's gone so far off a deep end that I'm like, where could they carry the series from there? And there's 6 more. So it's really exciting, and it's interesting to deal with the idea of plot when you have a day that just repeats over and over and over. Like, where can the author go? It's definitely an experiment that's paying huge dividends. Totally recommend it. Next, I'm not going to say too much because it's a sequel, but I read Harrow the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, and that was, I think, the first book I read this year. Uh, Harrow the Ninth, sequel to Gideon the Ninth. It's the series that I'm most like hyped about as a fan. Everything that's a risk about Gideon the Ninth has been amplified, and it's just awesome. I think it's better than the first one for sure. Um, Gideon, she's a very sympathetic protagonist, really, really likable in the first one. So to make the choice to switch protagonists completely, which is what happens in the second one, at first you're like, oh, like I really miss that voice. But by the end of the book, I end up liking Harrow a lot more as a narrator and character. She's way more interesting. The biggest criticism that I see from some friends of mine even is that it's really confusing. They drop you into the deep end. It starts in the second person. Everything's written as you, and that continues for about for a very long time. Uh, and they don't really explain why. And there's all kinds of weird choices that I don't even want to spoil. Where as a reader, you're just thrown into the deep end. Um, this definitely serves a thematic purpose, and it really helps you to sympathize with Harrow. In the first book, she's like stuck up, I would say is the word, and like a little unlikable because of that. She's condescending to the main character. By the end, you end up liking her and really liking their relationship, but you can't really imagine her as a protagonist. By dropping you into the plot like this in the second book, you as a reader are mirroring the state of Harrow as a protagonist, which I think is really effective because she is losing her mind. She's literally haunted by like a spirit and has been since she was like 8. And she can't remember the last few like days of her life, and she's being dropped into this scenario of becoming like a kind of bodyguard for a person she sees as her god. It's like a really crazy um scenario, and she's sick. She can't trust her own senses. So like all of this is reflected as a reader. You can't really figure out what's real and what's fake. You have a kind of detachment from a lot of the new characters, which Harrow also has. So you really are sharing Harrow's mindset, and it makes her into a really sympathetic character. So I think that's really effective, and I understand why she did it. But at the end of the day, I actually did find the book too confusing too, just because I literally couldn't figure out plot points sometimes, which is a skill issue. In the end of the book, I can't really tell where she was going. Like it just ends at a very confusing note, which I guess makes you want to grab the next one. I have the next one actually, so I'm gonna read it soon. Not immediately. Almost dropped my laptop. Jesus Christ. Here. So that's pretty exciting. Can't wait to read that. That's essentially all I have to say about that. My last little note, I don't read a lot of genre fic. I don't read a lot of sci-fi and fantasy, like modern stuff, because I feel like this is a very common criticism, but a lot of the time the books are vessels to deliver plot and cool new concepts, right? Which is all right, but I really read for style. At the end of the day, I read for cool language. I read for, compelling characters and perspectives. And Muir, she does have this exciting new plot, exciting cool world, interesting necromancy system, I guess. But her biggest innovations are really in style and developing a confident but entirely idiosyncratic authorial voice, which again is, I think, I said it a lot in the first in Gideon, but it's a lot to do with the Homestuck influence and making bold choices that establish yourself as a unique author with a unique vision. If the first book was inspired by Homestuck, this one was very much inspired by the Homestuck epilogues, I would say, but I could be projecting too much of myself into it. Next up, Flatland, A Romance of Many Dimensions, is by Edwin A. Abbott. You might have heard of this book before. My scenario in which I ended up reading this is kind of funny, and I think it really colored the way I read the book. So my girlfriend was traveling for her job. She was in New York City for a little convention, and well, we decided I would meet her in NYC. So I drove to the train station, um, and had a pretty bad park job. Went to fix my park job, left my car, locked my keys in the car door with all of my belongings that I was going to take for the trip. So I left my book for the travel in the car. I left my charger, change of clothes. It's pretty devastating. So I ended up having to just kind of go onto the train and like raw dog it. I put it on airplane mode because it was only on, my phone was only on like 40% battery. I was like, I need to have it on when I get to Grand Central. So I have it on airplane mode and I'm just like looking out the window. Obviously that's not enough. So I go on my iPhone like books app and see what I already have downloaded. And I've had Flatland downloaded since like 7th grade. I think I read it in middle school originally, and I just, since it's in the public domain, I have a lot of those Project Gutenberg books on my phone in case of emergency. So I read about half of it on the way to New York, and half of it on the way back, really, because it's a really quick read. It's about 80 pages, and it is fantastic. I'm sure it's not going to be my best book of the year at the end, but I think it's in that rare category of books that I would say I think literally everybody should read. Flatland. It's super accessible, short, and it's just so imaginative. I think that people see it as a social satire of like Victorian England. I think more people should look at this as a proto dystopia, really interesting, like kind of dystopian view of Victorian society amped up. But let me get into the plot a little bit. This is, it's narrated by a square, a physical square who lives in Flatland. It's basically a piece of paper. Everybody is geometric figures, and they don't see things as we would see a sheet of paper, a plane. They see everything as just like a line because they're seeing it on the ground level. They have all kinds of great illustrations in the book to visualize this, but basically Edwin A. Abbott, he starts with, this funny authorial voice of everything. He says it's by a square. Like on the main page, he's like, just a gentleman's square, and describes how the society of Flatland functions. Which, there's very robust social class systems. Women in the working class are severely discriminated against. They are considered to be like basically brainless and like threats to the social structure. And there's all kinds of legislative discrimination against the lines and the isosceles triangles. I think if you were, yeah, women are lines, by the way. Working class are isosceles triangles, and then tradesmen are equilateral triangles. It's this very like, I mean, I think it's a commentary on like phrenology, really. It's this very biologically regimented world. After you've become fully submerged in this 2D world, the protagonist is pushed out of it by a sphere, a three-dimensional figure who welcomes him to this new like world of understanding. He sees Flatland from an aerial view, and his whole world is just shattered open. And it turns out, it's revealed, a little bit of a spoiler, that once every 1,000 years, this sphere comes and tries to awaken a member of Flatland society, but they can't conceptualize, a world that they've never perceived. You get to visit Lineland, the 2 dimension. You get to visit Pointland. It's literally just one guy. It's pretty awesome. So it's super, super creative. And I think that my reading was also tainted because I went to the MoMA while I was in New York for a couple hours, got to see a lot of this Russian avant-garde work I studied in college, which Russian, it's a suprematism, which is a lot of like geometric work. Kazimir Malevich is a really good example. Elizitsky. I'll put up some pictures. And they were using mathematics, these artists, as a kind of method of creative liberation because there were all these kinds of like new innovations happening in the world of science and mathematics, moving from a Euclidean system of geometry to these new like non-Euclidean mathematics. And they saw that as like art has always been about representing reality, and they saw in these new systems a kind of escape from traditional reality, and they turned that into like a political and social thing too. Like it gave them the courage to imagine new systems of living, which is what happens to the square in this book too. So I think that seeing new geometrical ways of thinking for Edwin A. Abbott, you could view it as seeing new ways to structure society, new political modes. But I haven't seen anybody else read the book like that. So if you do get the chance to read Flatland, I'm curious if you see something like that in it too. And even if you don't view it in that political way, it is just a really fun read. It's fun, short. It's got some humor to it, and it's fun to kind of put yourself into like really imagining what these like lower dimension worlds would look like. Next up, it's another book that I've been reading of like early Greek philosophy. I've been trying to work my way through chronologically. Last time I read a book about Zeno. This time I read a book about the Atomists, Democritus and Leucippus, I believe is how it's pronounced. These guys, it's funny to read this in conjunction with Flatland because both are about reducing the complex phenomena of like the whole world into simple geometry. So the Atomists, they were the first ones to postulate the existence of like a smallest indivisible unit of reality, which they called atoms. It's Greek. Atom means uncuttable. And they kind of got it right, and they figured it out off of base principles and just like reasoning from there. They're actually responding to a paradox of Zeno, which I won't get into, but it's interesting. I mean, that they were able to figure out like a real thing just from reasoning. But of course, the system, as you really examine the cracks in it, doesn't end up making a lot of literal sense. This author, the translator who does it here, C.C.W. Taylor, he translates and then offers a pretty in-depth commentary that I thought was helpful. Was really good at reasoning through the consequences of these arguments. A conclusion I have about reading a lot of early Greek philosophy in general is like, even if their worldview conclusions don't make sense, the methodology that authors like Aristotle use to come to their conclusions is still really sound and helps you think about uh, just methods of thinking in your everyday life too. Like just because their worldview has become outdated doesn't mean that the way they thought has become outdated, because a lot of these people are really geniuses and has helped me like be self-critical and thinking about why I think what I think, analyzing the arguments of other authors, which is really an indispensable thing. But yeah, the I don't know if I recommend this specific book, to be honest, but it's worth reading about their ideas. I thought the translator was really good. But it's a little overlong, and not a lot of people reading this kind of stuff anyway. It's just a little project for myself. Last one for today, the Sot-weed Factor by John Barth. This is the one physical copy that I have, and I have to tell you, this was before I got new glasses, so my prescription was way off, and the lettering in this book is so tiny. It seems like it's going to be like a kind of long read, but not huge. But the paper is really thin. This thing is like 700 pages. It took me forever to finish, and I really started resenting the format that I was reading it in. This like mass market paperback, I think, really hurt my reading experience because it's just cheap paper, this tiny like stuff I have to squint, and in bad lighting I honestly had a lot of trouble physically reading it. But I got new glasses now, so maybe it'll be a little better. But I've decided, if I'm gonna read a book and if I'm gonna have a copy of the book, I gotta buy a good copy at this point. Like I get that it's like nice to have a discount book and like the words don't change. That was like my rationale as a kid, but these days, like, nah, I'm gonna get something luxurious and just a nice copy because it affects my enjoyment. Anyway, let's talk about the book itself a little bit. Uh, Sot-weed Factor is it was written in like the 1960s, maybe exactly 1960, but it's in the style and the structure of like a classic 18th century English novel. I've heard people compare it to Daniel Defoe or Thackeray's Vanity Fair. I haven't read either of those. It made me think, this is a bit later, but of like Les Miserables, like this epic, completely unfolding narrative with lots of stories within stories. Also, it's a lot like Voltaire's Candide, but that's just a little novella. This has a lot of the same satirical elements of Candide and also similar plot points. It's a picaresque, uh, but it's inflated out to this huge scale. It's great, definitely attempting to be like a great American novel. Uh, but yeah, picaresque, if you don't know the term, is like, it's like Don Quixote. Essentially, Don Quixote and Candide are both archetypal examples, but it's a kind of misadventure. Someone gets thrown into these absurd satirical scenarios one after another. By the end, comes to some kind of conclusion, often about the absurdity of life, or about the character of man, but it's a comic novel to start with. Picaresque, that's points against the book for me to start, because I tend to not like books like that where it's just one scenario after another, because you kind of lose continuity of an overall plot, and the stakes, they kind of vanish too, because there's just so many characters and so many intertangled plots that I end up losing investment in this genre a lot of the time. Um, the biggest comparison point for me, as far as recent books I've read, was Thomas Pynchon's Shadow Ticket, which I talked about in my last reviews. I had a similar problem with Shadow Ticket. I think the two authors came out of a similar cultural zeitgeist in America. Much like that book, it's a real exercise in sampling like the flavor and the nuance of a specific time period's language. That was definitely the best thing about Shadow Ticket, and it's my favorite thing about Sot-weed Factor. To start with, this like 1700s English is hard to like just understand. At least it was for me, and you feel a little distance from it. But as you become more and more acquainted with it, you really experience like the full expressiveness of that language. It's super flavorful in a certain way. It's really funny too. But it is my main problem is that it is just really, really long. I didn't have it in me for this length of a book, especially with this system of stories within stories. At first, it's really fun that anytime like a little anecdote comes up, they talk about it in full. This is one of the real joys of reading Les Miserables. But when the book is this long, and unlike Les Miserables is tragic, this is comic, so it doesn't really. By the end, it begins to really grate on me every time that they have a segue away from the main story, and tell another story in full. It starts to just become like, it feels like filler. Like these are little detours, and I just want to like get back to how the story concludes itself. Um, but the thesis of the book was really compelling to me. John Barth, he's writing in American postmodernism at this point, but he's writing this historic novel in the historic tone and voice, using events from real American history. But he's writing about themes of postmodernity, the absurdity of life and nature, the mutability of identity, especially, was the main theme of the book. The difficulty of identifying right and wrong and choosing between them. This is when people talk about the history of American literature and philosophy, they act like postmodernism is a unique problem that we've kind of created for ourselves. But by writing a historic novel about these postmodern themes, John Barth's kind of arguing that uh, these questions and these themes have been ever present in America. This is really obvious when there's one section that straight up recounts the colonial history of Maryland. And I can tell this is where like John Barth got the idea. He was like studying his local history and just ended up getting invested in these stories. But the colonial history of Maryland and New York, for that matter, any real area of the country, the land exchanges hands countless times. Historical figures come back in vastly different roles, and it's kind of a muddle. It's confusing, and absurd, and that's what John Barth really argues. And I gotta say, this focus on local history was really appealing to me. I work at a local historic site, and I've had to study the history of colonial New York. Some of the characters in this book actually also figure into New York history. So that was really fun for me. And I think it does capture that kind of Wild West, rugged criminality of colonial America in a really fun and honest way, even though, the plot is absurd. So I got to give it points for that. But the length was really bad for me. And I also found the sense of humor like a little too crass. It was relying pretty exclusively on like sexual innuendo and a lot of like bathroom humor. The bathroom humor was kind of a huge win for me. The innuendo, not so much. And I don't mind a mixing of this like highbrow language with lowbrow comedy. At first, I found it really appealing, but again, after 800 pages, it ends up coming off pretty one note. Also, I feel like he deals with sexual assault as a theme pretty lightly. And you could make the argument that, he's writing in the style of the times of the 1700s, but to me, it really came off that he's writing in the style of, 1960 as an American man. But I don't know if I'd fully recommend it. I did enjoy it and get a lot out of it, but I think, again, the format I was reading, it really did a lot of damage. So that's everything that I've read. I tried to do a few less books this time so I could talk more in depth about each one. As a little treat, I'll show you some books that I've got recently. So then maybe for the next one, if I end up tackling any of these books, you guys could get a copy and then it could be a little book club thing, or, just so you know what's on the docket. So I'm reading right now. My girlfriend got me this copy, second volume of On the Calculation of Volume, second, I guess I should say second book, so I don't get too confused. I've just started. I'm probably going to be done with it within the week. I've been really chipping at, I got this from a bookstore in New York, Open Socrates by Agnes Callard. This might be a 5-star book. I've really been enjoying it so far. She's really dealing with Plato and Socrates in exciting and super helpful way. She's articulating things that are obvious, but that you never let yourself think about. Fun so far. So I'm reading that. Obviously, I have this copy of Nona the Ninth from the bookstore too. I'll get to that eventually. Yesterday, I got this book. Oh gosh, I'm getting out of frame here. Do You, Mr. Jones? It's about Bob Dylan. It's an anthology of literary scholars analyzing his lyrics and music. I was reading excerpts of it in the bookstore, and it seemed really cool. I do like Bob Dylan, and I'd like an excuse to start thinking about his work a little more critically. I had a huge phase with him after the Timothy Chalamet movie a year and a half ago, so I'd love to re-enter into that. And also, I got this really meaty Plato collection. Like I said, I've been deep on philosophy recently. Um, and this isn't even like the best edition of his work for sure. It's like select some really weird copies, but I really like the cover. I don't know if that's even frame. It's Lawrence Alma Tadema, classic kind of pre-Raphaelite Victorian academic artist. So I just thought it was gorgeous and I grabbed it. If I want to read The Republic, I'll do it in that edition, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. I just wanted to show off the cover. But yeah, it's a young YouTube channel. I would have released another video sooner, but I've had to clear off my phone and my laptop for storage, man. I need to get like an external hard drive because it just takes up a lot of space, but I'm working through it. I quit one of my really grueling jobs, and hopefully I can devote more time to, passion projects like this in the upcoming months because it's really fun. But yeah, thanks for watching. Leave a like, subscribe, comments. I'd love to just have, this little kind of micro community of friends of mine where we can talk about what we've been reading and what we've been enjoying. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.